They called the police on an 81-year-old woman for a $1 tip. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My bones aren't what they used to be, but my mind is as sharp as a tack, and my Tuesdays are sacred. For 47 years, every Tuesday morning, I've walked the 4 blocks to the Morning Glory Diner, sat in the 3rd booth from the door, the one with the small tear in the red vinyl that I've come to see as an old friend, and ordered the number 3 special. 2 eggs over easy, bacon extra crisp, rye toast with a pat of butter, and a cup of black coffee that could wake the dead. Patty, my usual waitress, knows my order by heart. She'd just nod at me with a warm smile, her pen already scribbling on her pad, before I even settled into the seat. But this Tuesday, Patty wasn't there. A young man I'd never seen before, with a thin mustache and a name tag that read Kyle, took her place. He seemed annoyed, like my very presence was an inconvenience. He slapped the menu down and grunted, "What'll it be?" I told him my usual, and he rolled his eyes before scurrying off to the kitchen. The coffee he brought was lukewarm, and the bacon was floppy. But I'm 81 years old. I've eaten worse things in worse places. I ate my breakfast, read my newspaper, and enjoyed the familiar hum of the diner. It was still my Tuesday. When I was done, I waved Kyle over for the check. It was $8.63. I always leave a $10 bill and tell them to keep the change. It's not much, but it's what I do. I placed the 10 on the table and began to slide out of the booth, my old joints protesting with a series of quiet clicks and pops. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Kyle's voice cut through the diner's chatter like a knife. Every head turned towards me. My cheeks burned with a sudden, hot shame. I turned to face him, my hand resting on the back of the booth to steady myself. "I'm going home, young man. I've paid my bill." "Hey," he sneered, pointing a finger at the table. "You left a 10. The bill is $8.63. You think you can just walk out without your change? That's how it starts. You cause a little confusion, and then you dash." I stared at him, utterly baffled. "'Cause confusion? Son, I've been paying for my breakfast here since before your parents were born. I always leave a 10. "Yeah, that's what they all say," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "I'm the new manager here, and I'm not letting people take advantage. You'll wait for your $1.37, and I'll watch you leave." My pride, a thing I have carried with me through decades of slights and insults, swelled in my chest. I straightened my back. "I will not be spoken to like a common thief. Give the change to your waitress as a tip, or keep it for yourself. I could not care less. But I am leaving." I took a step towards the door, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs. Before I could take a second, Kyle was in front of me, blocking my path. He was a good foot taller than me, and he puffed out his chest like a bantam rooster. "You're not going anywhere. I'm calling the cops." I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, bitter sound. "You're calling the police on an 81-year-old woman over a $1 tip? Go right ahead. I'm sure they have nothing better to do." But he did. He pulled out his phone, and in a voice dripping with false panic, he told the dispatcher he had a customer who was refusing to pay her bill and was becoming aggressive. Aggressive. Me. A woman who needs 2 hands to open a jar of pickles. Less than 5 minutes later, 2 police officers walked into the diner. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound that felt like a mockery. They were both white. One was older, with a sour face and a thick gut that strained against his uniform buttons. The other was younger, barely out of his 20s, with a nervous energy about him. The older one, whose name tag read Miller, swaggered over to our booth. "What's the problem here?" he asked, his eyes immediately dismissing me and focusing on Kyle. "This woman," Kyle said, pointing at me dramatically. "She ate a full breakfast and now she's refusing to pay, trying to dine and dash. When I confronted her, she got belligerent." Officer Miller turned his hard eyes on me. He looked me up and down, taking in my simple cotton dress and my worn-out walking shoes. His lip curled in a tiny, almost imperceptible sneer. "Ma'am, is this true? You refusing to pay for your food?" "Of course not," I said, my voice trembling slightly with rage. "I left a $10 bill on the table for an $8 check. I told this young man to keep the change, just as I have done every Tuesday for nearly 50 years. Miller glanced at the $10 bill on the table, then looked back at me. So you admit you didn't wait for your change. Seems to me like you were in a real hurry to get out of here. We're going to need to see some identification. My identification? I was aghast. For paying for my breakfast? You're part of an investigation now, Mom, he said, his voice low and menacing. Now, are you going to show us your ID, or are we going to have to take a ride downtown? My hands were shaking as I reached for my purse. The whole diner was silent, watching. I felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. Humiliation washed over me, cold and sickening. I fumbled with the clasp, my fingers feeling clumsy and foreign. Come on, Grandma, we don't have all day, Miller grunted. That's when I felt it. His hand on my arm. He grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging into my thin skin. The touch was like an electric shock. All the air left my lungs. In that single moment, I wasn't an 81-year-old woman in a diner. I was a young girl in Alabama again, watching men in uniforms put their hands on my father. The fear was the same. The cold, metallic taste of it in my mouth. But then something else rose up. Not fear. Fire. The same fire that had carried me through marches and sit-ins, through a life of being pushed and prodded, and told I was less than. I wrenched my arm away from him. Get your hands off of me, I said, and my voice didn't shake. It was as solid and unyielding as ancient stone. Miller's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed into angry slits. That's it. You're coming with us. Obstruction. Resisting. No, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I am not. But I would like to make one phone call. He let out a harsh laugh. A phone call? You think you get a phone call? This isn't a movie, lady. You're under arrest. The younger officer, Davis, shifted his feet. Sir? Maybe we should just let her make the call. What's the harm? Miller shot him a glare that could curdle milk before turning back to me with a smirk. Fine. Make your call. Who you gonna call? Your fancy lawyer? I ignored his sarcasm and slowly, deliberately, pulled my old flip phone from my purse. My fingers, steady now, navigated the familiar buttons. I pressed the number 2 on my speed dial. As the phone began to ring, I held Officer Miller's gaze. I'm not calling my lawyer, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying through the silent diner. I'm calling my grandson. Miller scoffed, crossing his arms. Oh, I'm so scared. What's your grandson gonna do? The phone clicked on the other end, and a deep, clear voice I knew better than my own heartbeat answered. Grandma, is everything okay? I kept my eyes locked on the officer who still had his hand near his cuffs. Everything is fine, dear. I just have a quick question for you. I'm at a diner, and I'm having a small disagreement with an officer. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat. His name is Miller. I was just wondering, do you happen to know a police officer by that name? There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the kind that isn't empty, but full of thought, full of a mind processing information at lightning speed. Then my grandson's voice came back, and all the warmth was gone. It was replaced by something cold and hard, like polished granite. Put him on the phone, Grandma. Officer Miller let out another disbelieving chuckle. He wants to talk to me? This is rich. All right, hand it over. He snatched the phone from my hand, his knuckles brushing against my skin, and put it to his ear with a theatrical sigh. Yeah, this is Officer Miller. What can I do for... His voice trailed off. His whole body went rigid. The smirk on his face didn't just fade. It collapsed like a building imploding. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. His eyes, which had been hard and dismissive, were now wide with a dawning horror. He looked at my little flip phone as if it were a venomous snake. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. The arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. Yes, sir, he squeaked, his voice a full octave higher than it had been. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thick neck. No, sir, I wasn't aware. Of course, sir. The younger officer Davis watched his partner, his brow furrowed in confusion. The manager, Kyle, still had his arms crossed, but the defiant look on his face was starting to curdle into uncertainty. The entire diner was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Miller stammered into the phone. He held it out to me, his hand trembling so badly I was afraid he might drop it. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. He was staring at a spot on the floor just past my feet, like a sinner before his judge. I took my phone back and put it to my ear. "Are you all right, dear?" I asked, my voice soft. "I'm on my way, Grandma," my grandson said, his voice now filled with a controlled fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting could be. "Don't you move. Don't let them move. I'll be there in 3 minutes." The line went dead. I folded my phone shut and placed it back in my purse with deliberate slowness. I looked at Officer Miller, who was now sweating profusely, dark patches blooming under the arms of his uniform shirt. "What's wrong, officer?" I asked, my voice even. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He couldn't speak. He just shook his head, looking helplessly at his partner. Officer Davis stepped forward. "Ma'am, what's going on? Who was that on the phone?" Before I could answer, Kyle, the manager, piped up, his bravado returning now that the phone call was over. "It doesn't matter who it was. She hasn't paid. You need to arrest her." Miller spun on him, his face a mask of desperation. "Shut up, just shut your mouth, you idiot," he hissed. The venom in his voice made Kyle recoil as if he'd been slapped. And then we heard it, the sound of sirens, not approaching from a distance but suddenly right outside. It wasn't the slow, methodical arrival of a routine patrol. This was the urgent, piercing wail of multiple cars descending on a single spot. 2 black and whites and a sleek, unmarked black sedan screeched to a halt in front of the Morning Glory Diner, their lights painting the windows in frantic flashes of red and blue. The diner door flew open, and 2 uniformed officers I'd never seen before rushed in, their hands on their holsters, their eyes scanning the room. But they weren't looking at me. They were looking at Miller and Davis. A moment later, my grandson walked in. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, the kind you see on men who run cities, not patrol them. He's a good-looking man, my grandson. Tall, strong, with my late husband's kind eyes and a jawline that could cut glass. But right now there was no kindness in his eyes. There was only a cold, hard fire. He moved with an aura of absolute authority that silenced the room more effectively than any shout. He walked straight to me, ignoring everyone else. He gently took my arm, the same one Miller had grabbed, and his eyes scanned it, as if looking for bruises. "Are you hurt, Grandma?" he asked, his voice low and full of concern. "I'm fine, James. Just a bit shaken," I whispered. He squeezed my hand gently, then turned. His gaze fell upon Officer Miller, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Miller looked like he might actually faint. James didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Officer Miller," he said, the words cutting through the air like shards of ice. "My grandmother asked you if you knew an officer by your name. I believe she was referring to me. My name is James Miller. I'm the chief of police for this city. And you have a lot of explaining to do." He let the words hang in the air, a death sentence for a career. Chief of Police James Miller, my grandson. He then turned his cold eyes from the terrified officer to the pale-faced manager. "You," James said to Kyle, his voice dangerously calm. "You're the one who started this?" He took a step forward. "I want every second of your security footage from the moment my grandmother walked through that door, and then you're going to get me the personal cell phone number for the regional director of this franchise. You will do it now." Kyle, the manager, looked like a fish that had just been yanked out of the water, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. He fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking so violently I thought he'd drop it. The number. For the director. It's in the office. And the footage. It's on the DVR in the back." He pointed a trembling finger towards a door behind the counter. James didn't even look at him. He turned to one of the officers who had entered with him, a stern-looking woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Officer Jensen, relieve Officer Miller of his firearm and his badge. Officer Ross," he said, nodding to the other. "You do the same with Davis. They are both on administrative leave, effective immediately. I want them to wait in separate patrol cars until Internal Affairs gets here." It happened so fast. One moment, Miller was a man with a gun and a badge, full of bluster and authority. The next, he was just a man. A scared, sweating, paunchy man in a costume, watching Officer Jensen professionally and dispassionately unclip his weapon from its holster. His face crumpled, All the fight went out of him, replaced by a look of utter desolation. He didn't resist. He couldn't. The younger one, Davis, looked almost relieved as he handed over his own equipment. He kept glancing at me, his eyes full of a frantic apology. He couldn't speak. James then came back to me, his face softening as his eyes met mine. He gently guided me back into the familiar red vinyl of my booth. "Just sit here for a moment, Grandma. I'll handle this." He took off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled faintly of clean laundry and the mints he always keeps in his pocket. It felt like a shield. He then turned to the other patrons, who were all still frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. "I apologize for the disturbance," he said, his voice ringing with command. "My officers will be taking statements from anyone who wishes to provide one. For the rest of you, your breakfast this morning is on the city police department." He pulled out his wallet, handed several large bills to a stunned Officer Jensen, and said, "Cover everyone's meal, and get a real tip for the waitress, Patty. Tell her Mrs. Franklin sends her best." He had remembered Patty's name. Of course he did. A moment later, Kyle emerged from the back office, holding a tablet computer like it was a bomb. He offered it to James, his eyes fixed on the floor. The footage is queued up, Chief Miller. Sir?" James took the tablet. He didn't sit down. He stood there in the middle of the diner his grandmother had treasured for half a century, and pressed play. I couldn't help but watch his face. The video had no sound, but I didn't need any. I had lived it. I saw myself on the tiny screen, a small, gray-haired woman trying to leave a diner. I saw Kyle's aggressive posture, the way he blocked my path. I saw Miller and Davis walk in, the immediate dismissal in Miller's eyes. As James watched, his expression transformed. The professional calm evaporated, replaced by a slow-burning rage that tightened his jaw and turned his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the tablet. I could see the muscles in his neck cording. He was no longer the chief of police watching evidence. He was a grandson watching someone hurt the woman who had raised him. The video reached the moment Miller put his hands on me. From the camera's angle, high in the corner of the room, you could see it all perfectly. You could see how I flinched. You could see his fingers dig into the thin flesh of my arm. You could see me wrench away, my face a mixture of shock and defiance. You could see Miller's face twist in anger as he reached for his cuffs. James's breath hitched. A low, dangerous sound rumbled in his chest. He tapped the screen, and I realized he was turning on the audio. He rewound it a few seconds. We heard the whole exchange again. My tired, old voice, firm but shaking. Kyle's obnoxious accusations. And then Miller's grating, condescending tone. "Come on, Grandma, we don't have all day." But then, as he reached for me, he muttered something else, something low under his breath, directed at his partner Davis. With the tablet's volume turned up in the silent diner, the microphone picked it up with perfect, horrifying clarity. It was a single, ugly phrase I hadn't even heard in the heat of the moment, my ears ringing with adrenaline and shame. James froze the video. The color had completely drained from his face. He slowly lifted his head, and his eyes, my late husband's kind, gentle eyes, found mine across the booth. They were filled with a pain so deep it stole my breath, and a cold fury that chilled me to my very bones. "Grandma," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a razor. "I need you to be honest with me." He swallowed, his throat working. "When he grabbed you, did you hear what he called you?" I looked into my grandson's pained eyes and slowly shook my head. "No, James, I didn't. There was so much noise in my own head, I didn't hear anything but his shouting." He closed his eyes for a moment, and I saw his shoulders slump, just a fraction, under the weight of it. He took a deep, steadying breath, then walked over to the patrol car where Miller was sitting in the back, handcuffed. He opened the door and crouched down, holding the tablet so Miller could see the screen. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his voice was low and lethal. I saw Miller shake his head frantically, his face a mask of terror. James said something else, then jabbed a finger at the screen. I saw Miller's whole body sag in defeat. The fight, the denial, the bluster, it all evaporated, leaving only the shriveled core of a hateful little man. James stood up, closed the door, and walked back into the diner. He looked at Officer Jensen. "Add a federal hate crime charge to the docket," he said, his voice flat and final. "The audio is clear. I want him processed at the federal building, not county. I'll make the call myself." A collective gasp went through the diner. This was no longer about a disputed bill or even police misconduct. This was something far uglier. My grandson, my James, the boy I used to bounce on my knee, was now wielding the full power of the law to lance a poison that had seeped into his own department. He came back to me, his face etched with exhaustion and sorrow. "Grandma, I am so sorry. I am so sorry this happened to you." "This isn't your fault, James," I said, reaching out and putting my hand on his cheek. "You can't control the hearts of all men." "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I can hold them accountable for their actions. And I will." Just then, a man in a rumpled suit came hurrying into the diner, looking flustered. He made a beeline for Kyle, who was trying to make himself invisible behind the coffee machine. "Kyle, what in God's name did you do? I got a call from the chief of police." This, I presumed, was the regional director. James intercepted him. He didn't need to introduce himself. The director took one look at James's face and paled. "Chief Miller," he stammered. "Your manager," James began, his voice dangerously calm, "falsely accused my 81-year-old grandmother of theft over a $1 tip. He then lied to a 911 dispatcher, claiming she was aggressive, which resulted in a wrongful and abusive arrest. He has brought shame and a federal investigation to your establishment. You have 1 hour to inform me, in writing, of his termination. After that, I'll be speaking with the press about the culture of disrespect your company clearly fosters. Do you understand me?" The director nodded so vigorously I thought his head might come off. He grabbed Kyle by the arm and practically dragged him into the back office. We heard a few seconds of frantic, muffled shouting, and then Kyle scurried out the back door, his career at the Morning Glory diner over as quickly as it had begun. James finally let out a long sigh, the tension easing from his shoulders. He turned to me and managed a small, tired smile. "Can I take you home, Grandma?" I nodded, my own strength finally beginning to fail me. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only the deep, aching weariness of an old woman who had been through far too much. He helped me out of the booth, his strong arm a comforting presence around my shoulders. As we walked towards the door, the other patrons, the ones who had stayed, began to applaud. It started with one person, then another, until the whole diner was filled with the sound of their support. It was a small thing, but it felt like a balm on a raw wound. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Police chief's grandmother falsely arrested, exposes racism in own department. James didn't shy away from it. He held a press conference, and he didn't make excuses. He called out the poison of racism by its name and promised a top-to-bottom review of his department's training and hiring practices. He looked tired, but he stood tall, and I had never been more proud of him. A week later, on a Tuesday, I wasn't sure if I could go back. The thought of that booth, that diner, filled me with a familiar dread. But as I was sitting in my armchair, staring at the clock, there was a knock on my door. It was James, holding a small paper bag. "I thought you might miss this," he said, pulling out a familiar white styrofoam container. Inside was the number 3 special. 2 eggs over easy, bacon extra crisp, rye toast with a pat of butter. He'd even brought a thermos of coffee, black and steaming hot. We sat at my little kitchen table and ate our breakfast together. "Patty's back at the diner," he told me. "The new manager is the son of the original owner. He said your breakfast is on the house for life." I smiled. "That's very kind of him." "They've been getting calls from all over the country," James continued. "People supporting you, supporting what you did." I looked at him. My grandson, the chief of police, a man of power and consequence, but in that moment, he was just my James. "I didn't do anything, dear," I said softly. "I just wanted to eat my breakfast, and I made one phone call." He reached across the table and took my hand. "It was the only call you needed to make, Grandma. It was the only call that mattered." And he was right. I am 81 years old. I have lived a long life, and I have seen the world change in ways both wonderful and terrible. I know that one phone call, one grandson, cannot erase all the ugliness in the world. But on that Tuesday, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.